On May 14, 1804, began one of the greatest expeditions in American history, the expedition of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the explorers who made America a nation that truly stretches from sea to shining sea. 4 years prior to this journey, in the year 1800, President Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon for $15 million, more than doubling the size of America. This new territory, however, was completely unmapped and untraveled, and America needed explorers with the skill, bravery, and willingness to traverse over 3,700 miles in a journey that would last 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. Thomas Jefferson chose Army officers Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, and many more to lead the expedition to explore the uncharted territory of the Louisiana Purchase. Their primary objective was to explore and map this unknown region in order to find a safe passage from one end of the Louisiana Purchase to the other, and found the territory for America, with their second objectives being to study the flora and fauna and to establish trading with the more than 50 new native tribes that they encountered along the way. Along their journey, they made incredible new discoveries, including entirely new species of plants and animals that were previously unknown to the world. Overall, the Lewis and Clark expedition explored previously uncharted lands from the Midwest to the Pacific, encountered and discovered hundreds of new plant and animal species, and exchanged their loyalties with the Native Americans along their journey, fulfilling the manifest destiny.
The Corps of Discovery started their expedition upstream on the Mississippi River in May 21st, 1804. The group began traveling up the Mississippi River in a 55-foot keelboat, as well as 2 other small boats. During their journey, Lewis stayed on land, recording everything he could about the land. Meanwhile, Clark stayed in the boat, planning the trip and their route. By the end of July, they had traveled more than 600 miles up the river. On August 2nd, the group came across its first Indian tribe. The Otay-Missouri Indians arrived at the group's campsite and exchanged greetings and gifts with the explorers. While this encounter went well, Lewis and Clark knew they had to leave a good impression on the Sioux Indians when they met, as President Jefferson had warned the group before of the powerful tribe. A few weeks later, the Corps of Discovery had its first and only death. Sergeant Charles Floyd died on August 20th. His cause of death is believed to be appendicitis. Near the end of August, the group had finally reached the Great Plain. They encountered many animals, including buffalo, beavers, bears, and birds. Upon encountering the Yankton Sioux tribe, Lewis and Clark realized that the Yankton Sioux were a relatively peaceful tribe. Once again, Lewis and Clark exchanged gifts with the Indians, who were disappointed in the measly 5 medals they were given as gifts. The tribe warned Lewis and Clark of the tribes they would encounter later, saying the other tribes would be less merciful to the group. The Yankton Sioux were right. The tribes upriver were much more hostile. The Tenton Sioux tribe was much more hostile to the group's gifts. The animosity between the 2 groups began to grow, until finally, Clark drew a sword, and Lewis actually threatened the tribe with a gun from the boat. No conflict ensued, but there was little hope of future peaceful relations. In October, they reached the Mandan tribe's villages. Here, they would wait out the freezing winter. Lewis and Clark learned much about the country to the west from the Mandan and their neighbors, the Hidatsa. During the long winter, Lewis and Clark hired an interpreter named Dushyant Charbonneau. He was a fur trapper who lived with the Hidatsa, along with his wife, Sacagawea. When springtime came, Lewis and Clark sent some of their crew back to St. Louis, along with their findings and specimens. The rest of the crew loaded up their supplies and set out on an incredible exploration.
After nearly a year of traveling north, Lewis and Clark adjusted their compasses and began traveling west towards the Pacific Ocean. Later that month, they had a grizzly bear encounter with a grizzly that ran at Lewis, chasing him almost the length of a football field before being shot and killed. However, this was neither their first nor last bear encounter. Earlier in the year, they had a more humorous encounter with bears. Due to a trick by the crew, Clark believed that bears wore pants. I have just been informed that the pants were actually put on the bear after its killing. Humorous prank indeed. These bears were just a few out of the hundreds of different animals that they would discover along their perilous journey. The following month, around the 1-year anniversary of the trip, a storm stirred up some trouble. A squall of wind knocked the ship over on its side, causing all of the journals and supplies to fall into the sea. If not for Sacagawea, who quickly rescued most of the equipment that fell off, everything that they had recorded would have been lost to the sea. A few weeks later, Lewis finally saw the Rocky Mountains, a formidable barrier the explorers still had yet to cross. Making any headway was rough, as the river became shallow and rocky on their journey towards the Rocky Mountains. As pioneers, that there was no map or any way to know which is the right way to go. All they had were sextants and a chronometer, similar to a compass, to determine their longitude. Therefore, when they came across a fork on the road, all they could do was take their best guess, and they went south. No matter which way they took, there was a million-gallon problem: the waterfall. The crew was forced to portage their canoes for 10 miles out of water for an entire month. As they drew closer to the mountains, they knew that they would need horses to cross, but to acquire the horses necessary for the next leg of the journey, they would need to find and encounter the Shoshone Indian tribe, and hopefully be able to exchange gifts of their own for horses in return. However, as of the summer of 1805, no Shoshone Indians had been sighted, and it wasn't until August 11th that Lewis finally got a glimpse of a Shoshone Indian on horseback. Upon encountering the chief of the Shoshone tribe, Sacagawea recognized him as her brother, whom she had been separated from for years. The natives exchanged the horses for a cheap price of only a shirt and a knife at first, but as demand rose, so did the price. Even with Sacagawea's bargaining, Clark had to trade his knife, pistol, and 100 rounds of ammunition for just one sickly horse. Although the price was high, without these horses the crew would not have been able to cross over the perilous Rocky Mountains. After crossing the mountains, they created 5 dugout canoes and started on the water once more. Finally, in the middle of November, the crew finally made it to the Pacific Ocean after 18 months of traveling. For the explorers, it was truly a time to celebrate, as they had explored and mapped a route from the east to the west, officially completing the Manifest Destiny. Now, it was time for them to complete their expedition and find their way back home.
Lewis and Clark expedition crew stopped for the winter along a small river, south of the Columbia. They built a fort, Fort Clatsop, which was named after the closest tribe of Native Americans at the time. During the winter, they didn't have a lot of adventurous activities to fill their time with, so they devoted their time to making moccasins, buckskin clothing, storing their food, and writing out unfinished maps and journaling their thoughts and findings. How they went about returning would be crucial, because if they timed it wrong, they would have to go through another excruciating winter. The adventurers took out their 3 canoes and bought a 4th. They needed a 5th, but they couldn't afford it, so they stole it. The long, enduring venture home was about to mark their final journey. On the 23rd of March, the team took up at Fort Clatsop, and they started to go up the Columbia River. Chinook Indians were constantly giving the party trouble and pain. They repeatedly attempted to steal supplies and almost started an open conflict. Getting around the falls showed to be too time-consuming and dangerous. The team had to wait around for the poor weather conditions to improve a little, so they could attempt crossing the snow-covered Bitterroots. Clark occupied himself with healing tribal members. In early June, the party had obtained fresh horses and continued east. Against the blessing of the local Indian tribes, they thought that the group of adventurers couldn't make it across the Bitterroots until July. Nevertheless, Lewis and Clark left camp. Lewis and Clark decided to go their separate ways. The plan was to explore more land on Louisiana Territory. Lewis and 9 of his men would explore the Marias River to the north, while Clark and the others would march to the Yellowstone River in the south. Lewis and his crewmates knew the Marias were dangerous with Blackfeet Indian. When dawn broke, one of the Indians snatched a couple of rifles. There was a struggle where 2 Indians died. Meanwhile, Clark and his party descended on Crow territory, the Great Horse Plain Thieves. On July 21st, the team woke up to realize half of their horses were gone. To their astonishment, they never saw a single Crow Indian.
While out hunting on August 12, 1806, Clark accidentally mistook Lewis for an elk and shot him right through his left thigh, quickly reuniting the 2 groups. The explorers then coasted down the Mississippi River, saying farewell to Sacagawea after returning him to the Mandan villages, the location of their first and last friendly Indian encounters. However, the expedition still had to run through Titan Sioux territory, where the crew was met by nearly 100 armed Sioux warriors, who were luckily only there to threaten the returning explorers but did not harm them. Thought to be dead, Lewis and Clark shocked America when they returned from their extraordinary expedition on the morning of September 23rd, 2 years 4 months and 10 days after they had left. The explorers who had changed America were home at last.